The judge asked me one question, Mr. Coleman, do you understand that by signing this you are transferring full and irrevocable control of the estate, the business, and all associated holdings to Vanessa Coleman? I said. I do. My lawyer's hand was shaking on the table next to mine. Vanessa sat across the room in a black dress that cost more than my first boat, already smiling like the whole thing was over. Her lawyer slid the final page toward her, glanced down to check the numbers one more time, and went the color of drywall. He set his pen down like it had bitten him. That's the moment I want to start with. Not for drama, ask anyone at my shop. I'm the least dramatic man you'll meet. But because everything before it only makes sense once you've seen where it ends. So hold on to that image. A pale lawyer, a confident daughter-in-law, and a signature about to blow up everything she thought she'd won. Now let me back up, because you need to understand what I gave up before you understand what I got back. My name is Walter Coleman. I'm 61 years old, and for almost 40 years I've built and restored wooden boats on the water in Cedar Harbor, Michigan. My father taught me the trade in a cinder block shed with no heat, and I turned it into Coleman Boat Works, 22 employees, a 2-year waiting list for a custom sailboat. Not a fortune. Better than a fortune, a name people trust. I built it with my wife, Diane. She kept the books, kept me sane, and for 36 years kept me honest, the harder job, believe me. We had one son, Daniel. Good kid, better man. He had my hands and her patience, which made him twice as good with people as I ever was. 4 years ago, Daniel married Vanessa. Vanessa Reyes, as she was then, showed up at our 4th of July cookout on his arm, laughing at everyone's jokes, complimenting Diane's potato salad, asking me smart questions about hull design like she actually cared. Diane liked her fine at first. So did I. It's easy to like someone who's only ever shown you her best angle. It took about a year of marriage for that angle to shift. Vanessa never said outright that she hated the boatyard. She was too smart for that. She said it in 100 small ways, wrinkling her nose at the epoxy smell on Daniel's hands, asking in front of guests if he was still doing the boat thing, like it was a phase. You could be doing so much more, she told him once, right in front of me. You have an MBA, Daniel. You're better than sanding holes. Daniel laughed it off. That was his gift, and I'd learn later his weakness. That night in bed, Diane said something I should have listened to harder. She's not wrong that he could do other things. She's wrong about why he doesn't. He doesn't do other things because he loves this. She doesn't understand loving something that doesn't pay you like a hedge fund. What I didn't know, sitting there worrying about sawdust and attitude, was that Diane already knew something about the people circling our family. Something she'd been quietly sitting on. She never told me. She decided to build a case instead of raising an alarm. If you think you know already what she left behind, drop it in the comments. I want to see who figures it out before I get there. And if slow burn family stories are your thing, go ahead and subscribe now, because this gets a lot worse before it gets better. Daniel and Vanessa's marriage settled into a rhythm. He worked the yard with me, learning to run it the way I once did, badly, then less badly, then well. Vanessa worked marketing for a downtown real estate firm, which matters later. Her brother, Tyler Reyes, was a likable, aimless guy, always one bad month from a worse one. I liked Tyler fine, the way you like a stray dog that keeps showing up at the same hour. You feed it. You don't fully trust it. What I didn't know back then, wouldn't learn until much later, was that a man named Derek Voss had already come sniffing around the yard once, quietly. A full year before Vanessa ever entered our lives. Tall, tanned, a smile that cost a fortune in dental work. He'd approached Diane directly, not me, offering money for our shoreline on behalf of investors eyeing waterfront development. 40 feet of land Coleman Boat Works had sat on since before I was born, worth more per square foot as condos than boats. Diane told him no, and Diane didn't just say no and forget it. That wasn't how she operated. But at the time, all I knew was that Derek Voss came and went, and life moved on. It moved on right up until Vanessa started asking Daniel pointed questions. How the ownership was structured, what would happen to the yard if anything happened to either of us, whether I'd ever considered selling and actually enjoying retirement, instead of working myself into the ground for strangers' sailboats. I didn't connect the developer from years back to my daughter-in-law's sudden interest in ownership structure until it was almost too late. Daniel brushed it off, same as always. She's just planning ahead, Dad. She thinks in spreadsheets. I wanted to believe that. I mostly did because the alternative was ugly, and I didn't want to look at my son's marriage and see something ugly in it. Then came the storm. Second week of August. A Thursday, hot and still in the morning, with a line of dark clouds sitting low on the horizon that anybody with 40 years on this water would have read as trouble. I told Daniel not to take the Harlow out, a 42-foot sailboat we just finished restoring, needing a final shakedown before delivery. Quick test, Dad. In and back before lunch, wait till tomorrow. That sky doesn't like us. He laughed that easy laugh and said Vanessa had already told him to go, that she wanted him to stop asking permission for everything and start handling things like a real owner. I remember that phrasing because it stuck wrong in my throat and I couldn't say why. He went out alone. The storm came in faster and meaner than forecast. By the time the Coast Guard found the Harlow, it was half sunk 2 miles off the point. Mast snapped. Safety harness clipped to a line that had torn clean through at the stitching that should never have failed on gear I inspected myself, every season. They found Daniel 4 hours later. I'm not going to describe what that phone call sounded like. Some sounds don't belong in a story. I'll just tell you that afterward I sat down on my workshop floor, the same floor my father taught me on, and I didn't get up for a long time. My son was 34 years old. The funeral was the hardest thing either of us ever sat through. Vanessa wore black and cried real tears, and I believed those tears, whatever else was happening underneath. I don't think she wanted Daniel dead. I think she wanted something else, and something else got him killed on the way to it. Diane didn't cry at the funeral. She stood very still through the whole service, her hand in mine, and didn't say much for days afterward. I told myself it was grief working through her slow, then all at once. 9 days after we buried our son, Diane came into the workshop while I was pretending to sand trim I didn't need to sand, and handed me a small metal box. I need you to keep this somewhere safe. Not the house, safe somewhere else. And Walter, don't open it unless you really have to. You'll know when that is. I asked what was inside. She just shook her head. Let's talk tomorrow. I need to sleep first. I haven't slept right in 9 days. There wasn't a tomorrow. Diane died in her sleep 2 nights later. The doctors called it a cardiac event brought on by acute grief. The kind of thing that sounds like an old wives' tale until it happens to someone you love, and then it's just a fact you carry. I buried my wife 11 days after I buried my son. I don't have words for what that month did to me, so I won't try to manufacture any. I'll just tell you the box sat untouched in my truck's glove compartment for weeks, because some stubborn part of me was still waiting for the tomorrow she'd promised. The reading of the will was 3 weeks after Diane's funeral, in Mr. Callahan's office downtown. He'd been our family lawyer for 20 years, careful, dry, knew every clause by heart. Under the will, the estate passed jointly to me and to Vanessa as Daniel's surviving spouse, with the boatyard's ownership structure to be reviewed by the family. Fair. Generous to a grieving widow. She didn't want fair. I want the estate, she said, hands folded like she was closing a real estate deal instead of dividing up her dead husband's inheritance. The business, the house, everything. I think, given what I've been through, that's the least this family owes me." Mr. Callahan actually laughed, then caught himself. "Vanessa, that's not remotely how this works. I know what the will specifies. I'm asking Walter to do the right thing and not drag this out in court where it'll get ugly for everyone, including him. A threat wearing a nice dress. Afterward, Mr. Callahan told me flatly I had every legal right to fight this, that a judge would likely side with a fair split, and that I shouldn't simply hand a grieving, possibly grasping 32-year-old woman full control of a business I'd spent my life building. I told him I needed to think. That night I went home to the house Diane and I shared for 3 decades, empty in a way I still hadn't found the bottom of, and I finally took the metal box out of the glove compartment. Taped to the lid was a sticky note in Diane's handwriting. "Only if it really matters. You'll know." I sat at the kitchen table a long time before I opened it. Inside was a stack of papers, a flash drive, and a handwritten letter in Diane's neat, slanted hand. I've never forgotten what it said. "Walter, if you're reading this, something has finally gone wrong enough that you went looking. I hope I'm wrong about all of it. But 2 years ago, before Daniel even met Vanessa, a man named Derek Voss came to me directly, not you, offering money for our shoreline. I said no. He didn't take it well. I did some digging on him afterward because that's what I do. And what I found isn't something you say out loud without proof. So I got proof. Whatever happens, don't let anyone rush you into signing anything. Slow is safe. You taught me that in the workshop, remember? Never rush the work that matters." I sat in that kitchen and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not for Daniel this time, for my wife, who'd apparently been quietly guarding this family from a threat none of us knew we had, for 2 years, without a word. The papers were financial records, bank statements, a copy of a lawsuit Derek Voss had settled quietly in another state, involving falsified investment documents, and Diane's notes connecting him to at least 2 other small family businesses along the coast that had lost their land to buyouts that looked, on paper, a whole lot like coercion. The flash drive had something better, a recording. Diane used to record her business calls, an old habit from decades back that I used to tease her about. That quirk was about to save this family. On the drive was a call between her and Derek Voss, 2 years old, where he offered her, not me. Because he'd correctly guessed she was the harder sell and the real decision maker. A consulting fee to help identify which family businesses along the shoreline were financially vulnerable enough to approach. Diane said no, on tape, clearly, and then kept it. I used to think that meant she didn't trust me with it. I understand now she wasn't protecting the secret from me. She was protecting the timing. I called Mr. Callahan the next morning and read him everything. He didn't go quiet because he was confused. He went quiet the way a man does when several loose threads he'd been half-tracking suddenly tie into one knot. "Walter, listen carefully. Don't tell Vanessa any of this. Don't tell anyone. And don't fight her for the estate." I told him that made no sense. "Because a fair split fight in probate court is a private dispute," he said. "It gets argued behind closed doors, settled quietly. Vanessa and Derek walk away with their arrangement intact, and no reason to expose it. But if you give her everything, no resistance, she inherits every account, every contract, every liability tied to this estate the moment she signs, including whatever Derek's already moved through it that she doesn't fully understand. She's not just asking for the business, Walter. She's asking to legally attach her name to a paper trail she hasn't finished reading herself." Diane understood that. That's exactly why she built the case the way she did, evidence that only does its job the moment ownership actually changes hands. I understood the shape of it now. Diane had left me a trap disguised as surrender. Over the next month I did some quiet digging of my own. The kind an old man with a lot of free time and motivation can do without anyone noticing. I started paying closer attention to Tyler Ray's, who'd been around the yard more than usual, offering to help Vanessa with the books, which struck me as odd since he'd never shown the faintest interest in bookkeeping in his life. What made it possible was Ethan Cruz, our part-time office clerk, a good kid, 23, who had zero reason to think anything was wrong. Vanessa told him Tyler was helping the family sort paperwork and asked him to give Tyler after-hours access to the file room so he wouldn't be underfoot. Ethan, who'd never had reason to doubt anyone named Coleman by marriage, handed over a spare key without a second thought. I asked my foreman, Sam Reeves, 28 years with me, the closest thing I have to a brother, to keep an eye on things quietly. Tyler's been coming in after hours, Sam told me one evening. Ethan let him into the file room, said Vanessa cleared it. I checked the invoice drawer he was supposedly organizing. Nothing's organized. Something's being moved, Walter. I just don't know what. A week later I found out. Reviewing the shop's insurance file, I noticed the safety harness on the Harlow, the boat Daniel died on, had been serviced and recertified 3 weeks before his final trip. I hadn't done that inspection. I always did that inspection. Every boat, every season, 22 years running. The signature on the service log wasn't mine. Close enough that if you weren't the man whose signature it was forging, you might not catch it. Close enough that whoever wrote it had clearly practiced. Somebody had signed my name to certify a piece of safety equipment that killed my son. That's not a fact you get to feel calmly about. I brought it to Mr. Callahan. He quietly brought in a document examiner. The forgery was confirmed. Now the question was who? Tyler Ray's fingerprints, literal ones, turned out to be on that logbook, according to the private investigator Mr. Callahan hired. Ethan confirmed the rest without knowing what he was confirming. He'd logged exactly which evenings he let Tyler into the file room, because he'd followed the sign-in rule like he was supposed to. Good kid, followed the rules right up until the rules got used against him. And Tyler, it turned out, owed a significant amount of money to a man matching Derek Voss's description, borrowed for a business venture that never got off the ground. But that's not the piece that turned my stomach. Once Derek's name was confirmed as more than a stranger from an old sales pitch, a man with an actual financial interest in our land, the investigator did what any competent investigator does with a property dispute. Pulled a full title history on the shoreline parcel from the county recorder's office. Any lien, lease, or option agreement ever filed against that land would show up there. That's where he found it. A signed option agreement, filed quietly under a routine number nobody would ever search unless they already knew Derek's name. Vanessa's signature, notarized 2 towns over, dated 6 weeks before Daniel's final trip on the Harlow. It gave Voss Coastal Holdings exclusive rights to purchase our shoreline the moment Vanessa held full, unencumbered ownership. No shared title, no other family members, just her name on the deed. 6 weeks before my son died, my daughter-in-law had already signed a contract that only paid out if she owned everything. Not half, everything. She just needed the world to arrange itself, so that word stopped being a hypothetical. That's the piece that actually implicates her, not vague suspicion about a brother pulling favors, but her own signature on a contract giving her a documented financial motive for sole ownership. Dated weeks before the accident that made it possible. It doesn't prove she knew about the harness. It proves she'd already built the doorway that harness was meant to open. I asked Sam to invite Tyler over for coffee, casual, no pressure. I sat across from him myself. Tyler, I need you to tell me the truth about something, and I need you to understand it stays between us until I decide what to do with it. His hands shook around the cup. Tell me about Derek Voss, The color drained out of his face. How do you know that name? Answer the question. Derek had loaned him money 2 years earlier for a landscaping business that folded within 6 months. When Tyler couldn't pay, the interest ballooned, and Derek offered a way out: small favors. Information about the yard schedule. Then, once Vanessa vouched for him with Ethan, access to actual paperwork. Vanessa told Ethan I needed to help sort things out for her, Tyler said, staring at the table. It wasn't even hard. He's a good kid. He just trusted her because she's family. I'd go in after he left, and Derek would tell me exactly which page he needed and what to write. I've watched your signature on 100 invoices over the years, Walter. It wasn't hard to copy. I'm not proud of any of it. He told me it was just insurance paperwork, that the harness itself was fine. And it was just about the certification date, so a boat sale could go through faster for a client. I swear to God, I didn't know that harness was actually compromised. I didn't know anyone would get hurt. I believed him mostly. And I hated that I believed him, because it meant somebody else had made the decision that mattered with my son's life in their hands, and never told the man they used as a tool. Does Vanessa know? I asked. He wouldn't answer that directly, which told me most of what I needed to know. I want to pause and say something plain because it matters. I still don't know exactly how much Vanessa orchestrated, and how much she simply allowed to happen around her, without asking too many questions. There's a kind of guilt in not asking questions you're afraid of the answers to. I understand that guilt better than most, because I lived next to it for 2 years and told myself it was nothing. But knowing and allowing aren't innocence, not when a life is the cost of not asking. If you're still with me, tell me in the comments, do you think Vanessa knew about the harness, or was she only ever after the money? I've got strong feelings, and I'll tell you where I landed by the end. 2 nights after my conversation with Tyler, someone broke into the boatyard office. Nothing was taken, the safe untouched, computers untouched, but every physical copy of the harness service records had been pulled from the filing cabinet and was gone. Somebody wanted the paper trail erased before I could act. Good thing I'd already scanned every page and mailed the originals to Mr. Callahan's office a day earlier. Diane taught me that too, in a roundabout way. Slow is safe. Keep a copy of everything that matters someplace safer than where you keep it. The final hearing was set 6 weeks later. Vanessa's lawyer, Bradley Chase, contacted Mr. Callahan demanding I finalize the transfer immediately, framing my hesitation as cruel delay against a grieving widow. I told Mr. Callahan I was ready to sign. He nodded slowly, this careful, dry man who'd never once raised his voice at me in 20 years. Then here's what we do. We don't show our hand early. I'll prepare everything: the option agreement, the forensic report on the forgery, Tyler's statement, Ethan's sign-in records, Diane's letter and the recording, and file it all with the court under seal. It stays sealed until the transfer is finalized, not a minute before. The second Vanessa's signature goes on that paperwork, it unlocks automatically as part of the closing disclosure. That option agreement only pays out if she owns everything, unencumbered, alone. So let her get exactly what she asked for. The moment she does, her own contract becomes Exhibit A. If the seal doesn't hold or she finds out early, she walks, and we're stuck fighting probate for 2 years while Derek covers his tracks. That's the risk. But Diane didn't build this case for us to sit on it, Walter. She built it to go off exactly once, at exactly the right moment. I intend to honor that. I told him I trusted my wife more than I trusted my own fear. Then let's finish what she started. The morning of the final hearing, I wore the same gray suit I'd worn to Daniel's funeral. Seemed fitting. I drove to the courthouse alone and sat in the parking lot a few minutes before going in, just breathing, thinking about Diane's voice on that recording, calm, unbothered, telling a con man no. She'd already won this fight 2 years before I even knew we were in it. All I had to do was not get in the way. Inside, Vanessa was already seated with Bradley Chase. Sharp, young, the kind of lawyer who did most of the talking while she did most of the smiling. She looked composed, dressed like a woman who had suffered and endured and deserved whatever came next. Mr. Callahan leaned toward me one last time. "Last chance, Walter. We can still fight this the normal way." "No," I said. "Let's do it her way. Let's give her everything." The judge went through the paperwork line by line. Full transfer of the estate. Full transfer of Coleman Boat Works, including all associated accounts, contracts, and outstanding financial instruments. Full transfer of the shoreline property. Mr. Coleman, do you understand that by signing this, you are transferring full and irrevocable control of the estate, the business, and all associated holdings to Vanessa Coleman? "I do." I signed. Vanessa's smile was the widest I'd ever seen it. Then the court clerk handed the final document to Bradley Chase for his client's countersignature. The standard closing acknowledgment listing every account and asset now legally attached to Vanessa's name. Cross-referenced, as required by Michigan probate procedure, against any pending liens, investigations, or claims connected to those accounts. I watched him read it. Fast, bored, a lawyer skimming boilerplate he'd read 100 times. Then he hit the cross-reference section, and I watched his pace change entirely. Recorded instrument, option agreement, Vanessa Coleman and Voss Coastal Holdings, dated 6 weeks prior to incident referenced in pending case. Case reference, forgery, vessel safety certification, M.V. Harlow, fatal incident, active investigation. Financial records, Voss Coastal Holdings to T. Ray's cross-referenced. I watched every trace of color leave his face. "Your Honor," he said, his voice suddenly careful, "I need a brief recess to consult with my client." The judge asked why. "Because, Mr. Callahan said, standing, this document includes, as required disclosure, a notarized option agreement between Vanessa Coleman and Voss Coastal Holdings, signed 6 weeks prior to Daniel Coleman's death, granting that company exclusive purchase rights to the estate's shoreline contingent on Ms. Coleman holding full unencumbered ownership, which she now does, as of the signature she just provided. This document also references a pending forgery investigation connected to Mr. Coleman's fatal boating incident, and financial records tracing payments from Voss Coastal Holdings through Tyler Ray's. Under the transfer just requested, Vanessa Coleman is now the named party of record on every one of those filings. The room went very quiet. Vanessa turned to Bradley, her smile gone, replaced by something sharper and more frightened. "That contract was private." "How does he even have that?" "It was filed with the county recorder the day you signed it," Mr. Callahan said. "Private isn't the same as hidden. It was simply waiting for the day you finally owned enough to make it matter." Then he played the recording. Diane's voice filled that courtroom, calm and steady, the same voice that used to call me in from the workshop for dinner, the same voice that read Daniel bedtime stories, laying out plain as day. Refusing Derek Voss's offer years before any of this began. Then came the rest, the settled lawsuit, the pattern connecting Derek to other coastal families, the payments routed through Tyler, and finally, the forged signature on the Harlow's safety harness log. Vanessa's face went through about 4 expressions in a minute. Shock, anger, calculation, and finally something that almost looked like relief, like someone who'd been holding a weight a long time and had just watched it set down. Whether she wanted it set down or not. "I didn't know about the harness," she said quietly, mostly to herself. "I swear to God I didn't know about the harness. I believe that part. I think in the end, that's the one mercy I can offer her, that whatever she was chasing, she wasn't chasing her husband's death. Derek Voss was chasing that, alone, because a living Daniel Coleman asking careful questions about his wife's new financial habits was a liability, and a grieving widow signing everything over quietly was an opportunity. The investigation that followed took 4 months. I'll give you the short version, since you've earned it after sticking with me this long. Derek Voss was arrested and charged with fraud, coercion, and manslaughter connected to the tampered safety equipment. His pattern with other coastal families came out in discovery. 3 other small businesses, 2 of which had already sold their land to shell companies, traced back to him. He's currently awaiting trial, and his own attorney has reportedly told him to prepare for a plea. Tyler Reyes cooperated fully once the investigation opened, gave a full statement, returned what money he had left, and is serving a reduced sentence given his cooperation and the fact he genuinely didn't know the harness had been compromised. I visited him once before sentencing. He cried through most of it. I told him I forgave the fear, even if I couldn't yet forgive the choice. Vanessa was never charged criminally for Daniel's death. There was no evidence she knew the harness had been tampered with, but the option agreement was a different story. Prosecutors charged her separately for conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, built directly around that signed contract, and the payments traced through Tyler. Because the estate transfer had made her legally responsible for every account and filing attached to it the moment she signed. The funds Derek had funneled through, and the shoreline itself, were seized or unwound through civil proceedings before her criminal case even went to trial. The business came back to me cleaner than it had been in years, every account audited and verified. The last time I saw Vanessa was outside the courthouse, months later, waiting for a rideshare in the rain without an umbrella. She looked smaller than I remembered. "You planned this from the beginning," she said. "No," I told her. "My wife did, I just had to trust her." She didn't say anything else. She got in the car and left, and that was the end of it. I reopened Coleman Boat Works fully that fall. Sam runs the floor now, same as always, and I spend most of my days doing the parts of the work I love best. The sanding, the joinery, the slow work that matters. We finished the Harlow's replacement as a gift for the client who lost his original, because some debts aren't about money. I put a small plaque near the front door of the shop. Just 2 names and 1 sentence underneath: Diane and Daniel Coleman. Some things are worth the slow work. An old family friend stopped by last month and asked if I was doing all right out here running things alone. I told her I wasn't alone. Diane spent years quietly guarding this family from a threat none of us could see, and in her final days, she made sure that guarding didn't die with her. Daniel built a marriage on trust and paid the highest price a person can pay for believing in someone. Sam built 28 years of loyalty that never once wavered. I've got more family in this shop than most people find in a lifetime. I learned something out of all this I want to leave you with. Real revenge isn't loud. It doesn't come from hate. Sometimes it looks exactly like patience, like a woman recording a phone call 2 years before she needs it, like a husband trusting a note in a metal box more than his own fear, like giving someone everything they asked for and letting the truth attached to it do the rest of the work. Vanessa wanted the estate, the business, everything, so I gave it to her. And everything came with it. If this story hit you somewhere, tell me, what would you have done in my position? Would you have fought her in court or trusted the plan like I did? Let me know where you're watching from too. And if you enjoyed this one, hit like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. There's another story coming soon, and you won't want to miss where it starts.